Hey everybody, I'm here with a special series of reviews to start today, leading up to Brand New Day next month, starting off with Spider-Man Homecoming, starring Tom Holland, Jacob Batalon, Zendaya, Michael Keaton, Marissa Tomei, Robert Downey Jr., and directed by John Watts. Set right after the events of Captain America's Civil War, Peter Parker Spider-Man is given a task by Tony Stark in order to prove himself that he can be an Avenger full-time. Not only will I be talking about this one, but also be talking about Far From Home and No Way Home as we get closer to Brand New Day. But this is going to be a really exciting one, and I had a really good time watching this movie the other night. But just to get some things out of the way, first of all, we're going to go into spoilers. So if you haven't seen Homecoming by now, it's been almost 9 years. Now, actually, it's been about 9 years, so you've had plenty of time, but if you don't want to know, please leave. But there are a few things that I have to get off my chest about this one. We'll get to that as we go on. But with Spider-Man Homecoming, this was a huge, monumental moment after what we saw in Civil War the previous year. After all the stuff that happened with the Amazing Spider-Man movies and how that all fell out of place with how Sony handled the production of each one, they were obviously in a desperate position to get this back up and running, and they needed to do something to save it. Otherwise, the rights would have gone right back to Marvel automatically. But what we have now with this trilogy, along with the upcoming Brand New Day, it's a joint custody arrangement. If one wants to make a Spider-Man movie, the other has to be involved. Sony has final creative control, but Marvel's the one making most of the creative choices. And to rewind a little bit, before Civil War when we saw Spider-Man, I think a lot of people were feeling some sort of Spider-Man fatigue back then. I wasn't necessarily feeling that way, but I know a lot of people were, especially after how quick the reboot with Andrew Garfield was after Tobey Maguire's trilogy. But then his appearance in Civil War came in and everybody went, okay, yeah, no, this is more like it. Obviously, the TASM series has its fans, but there was clearly something wrong with that to begin with. We already know how that turned out, so there's no need to rehash it. Well, maybe one day. But I do remember seeing this at the time and being really excited about it, even though the trailers weren't really blowing me away or anything. After what we had with Tobey Maguire, the bar was really high with Spider-Man 1 and 2. And even now, after all this time, it's still a really high bar to meet. I did a review of it back in 2017. It was in the early days of my YouTube career. I'll put the link to it right here if you're curious to watch it. I sound pretty bad and probably don't look that great either. I was still trying to find my footing back then, still feeling my way along, but obviously this was the first good Spider-Man film that we had since 2004 at that time. And I watched it a handful of times since then, but it had been a few years until the other night that I watched it from beginning to end. I think Homecoming is a really good time. If I were to grade it, I don't usually grade movies on here, I'd probably give it like a 7.5 or 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 at best. I'll go with that. Certainly not a bad movie by any stretch, as I've heard some other people claim. People that I used to follow back in the day, I'm not going to mention by name here. And to be honest, I think a lot of those criticisms, while understandable and reasonable, some of it was a little overblown, and a lot of those guys were hard sells anyway. But I think this is a really good time, and Tom Holland is really like the one that really manages to hold it together for me. I know I say otherwise with certain movies, but to go right off the bat, he really is, I think, the movie's strongest point. Not just in his performance, which obviously Tom Holland with his little quirks and his mannerisms, he just looks like a really fun guy, and I wish that I had a chance to meet him at Comic-Con back in the day. That's a different story. But it's the overall arc that he goes through in here, where he tries to prove himself as an Avenger. Clearly this kid is out of his element with certain things. He can do the simple day-to-day routines, fighting muggers, car thieves, just saying hi to people in the neighborhood in Queens, but he's eager to prove himself as a heroic figure and tackle bigger things than what he's used to, just like the Avengers do. But Tony tells him, as we all know, you're not ready for that yet, kid.
Don't do anything I would do, and definitely don't do anything I wouldn't do. There's a little gray area in there, and that's where you operate.
What do you want?
That's the definition of the Kobayashi Maru, a no-win situation. But as I mentioned with Tom Holland's performance, the introduction of him when he's doing his vlog, taking a trip to Germany, seeing the events of Civil War from his perspective, he is so excitable and so energetic. I laughed my ass off back then, and I still do now. And seeing Happy Hogan get so annoyed with him, oh, Jon Favreau, well, I guess to get that out of the way, Happy Hogan's kind of an asshole in this one. I mean, I know he's annoyed and he's got a lot on his plate to deal with Tony Stark moving to the new Avengers headquarters and worrying about this kid. And it's all part of this test that Tony's doing to Peter to see if he can prove himself. But would it kill you to not be such a standoffish asshole once in a while? Doesn't give a single reply back to him over the course of 2 months. What kind of bullshit is that? But outside of Tom Holland's performance, the overall arc that he experiences, like I mentioned earlier, he wants to prove himself because he wants to join the Avengers full time, potentially. As he calls it the Stark internship to his fellow classmates at Midtown High. Peter has a really strong determination to prove himself, even to the point where it's a little bit arrogant on his part. I mean, he is a teenager, and he doesn't always make the best decisions, and he's certainly flawed in the way he deals with situations sometimes, and that's present throughout various interpretations like the comics, the other movies, and the video games and animated shows and so on. And I know I shouldn't make a comparison here because you guys know how I feel about Andrew Garfield's portrayal, his appearance in No Way Home notwithstanding. I certainly prefer the way they portray Peter in this one than how they made him a angsty, moody, careless teenager in the TASM films. You want to come at me for that? You go right ahead. And you'll probably say that Tom is more reckless than Andrew is. Nope. No.
Well, we'll get to that later.
People will say that Tom Holland's their favorite Spider-Man and they consider him to be the best one of the three. I would not argue with that, even though I personally think that Tobey is still the number one contender and will always be in my book. But Tom Holland, man, dare I say it, he's number 2 on the list. I don't know by how close he is to Tobey, but he's definitely up there in that ballpark for me. And I guess as far as the character stuff and storytelling with Homecoming, Peter Parker's probably given the most attention and most development because he actually does have a clear arc. Like when he's underneath all that rubble after he confronts the Vulture, he realizes that he doesn't need that suit to be a hero. It's because of who he is in here and in here. As Tony says, if you're nothing without the suit, you shouldn't have it. I do have some issues with the movie though. Aside from Peter Parker and actually Adrian Toomes, most of the other characters are very surface level and flat. Jacob Batalon as Ned Leeds, he's a really fun addition to have around, although I think he gets a little too annoying after he finds out Peter's secret, to the point where he might accidentally expose his secret to the other classmates. At a certain point I went, Ned, will you shut up? Some people might find him obnoxious. Besides that one portion, he's not for me. I think he's hilarious. Most of the other people besides Spider-Man and the Vulture, nobody's really given a whole lot to do. But the movie does kind of breeze by. It has a very solid pace to it that if I were really sucked into it, I probably wouldn't notice those things. I know for some people that might be a major problem, but for me, I'm able to let that go because of what they do with Peter and the Vulture. But I think we could have given some attention to certain characters, like Marissa Tomei's Aunt May. I've never really liked what they've done with Aunt May, except for No Way Home. How they portrayed her right from the get-go, from the moment she was introduced in Civil War. She is treated as eye candy, a sex object. If you think I'm making this up, I'm not.
It's so hard for me to believe that she's someone's aunt. Not even your unusually attractive aunt?
No.
Better tell Aunt Hottie I'm taking her on a field trip.
It's on the house.
Oh, thanks.
I think he largs you.
Marissa Tomei is a solid actress. She plays the part perfectly fine, but what they do with her here, I'm not a huge fan of. There's a couple moments with her that I like when they hang out at the restaurant, or when she calls him out on his frequent disappearances at school after he gets the suit taken away, or that montage where we see her helping him try on his suit for Homecoming. Those little moments I actually really like, but I think there could have been some focus given to her because when Peter's secret is revealed to Ned...
May cannot know. I cannot do that to her right now. You know? I mean, everything that's happened with her, please.
I was gonna save this for later, but I think I'm gonna go there right now. This is my big problem with this Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy. The fact that you don't mention Uncle Ben once, or at least acknowledge the impact that he's had on Peter Parker, this is something that I find to be extremely inexcusable. And I know some people are gonna argue otherwise with me. I understand you don't want to show the death of Uncle Ben all over again, just like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man did. But mentioning him by name at least once, or showing a picture of him, is not the equivalent of doing the death of Uncle Ben all over again. Ever since the TASM series, the movies are so afraid and so scared to piss off the fans by acknowledging Uncle Ben once. If you had Peter at least say something along the lines of, you can't tell Aunt May after everything that happened with Uncle Ben, she doesn't need to worry about me. I don't see people having a problem with that. Or even when Aunt May helps Peter try on his homecoming suit. You could have had at least one moment with her where she said, actually, you can wear this suit. It belonged to your uncle. He wore this at the homecoming dance that he took me to. A simple yet powerful way you could have acknowledged his impact on Peter. And this is a separate movie, but this moment here in the Spider-Verse movie, the first one with Jake Johnson's Peter B. Parker, this is a prime example of the aversion to even mentioning Uncle Ben once in the movies.
Great power comes
Don't
great...
you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
I know they mentioned Uncle Ben with Tobey's Spider-Man in No Way Home, but with Tom Holland, there is zero mention of him even once. You see his name on the suitcase in Far From Home.
That's not good enough.
Again, I am not saying You have to show the death of his uncle all over again, but at least show some kind of flashback to when he took Peter out for a walk, or took him to science camp, or took him to school, or some conversation that he had with him after a bad day at school. Something that would be along the lines of, or in the same arena of power and responsibility, as a reminder of the impact that he's had on Peter. If the Batman with Robert Pattinson can do the same thing with the Waynes, why can't we do the same thing for Uncle Ben? There are other ways of acknowledging him without doing the death all over again. End rant. But as I mentioned with some of the other characters not having much to do, Zendaya's MJ or Michelle Jones, she has this Allison Sheedy vibe to her where she's just kind of the weird one in the background, making all these weird noises and saying certain things that people wouldn't expect someone else to say. She's really just kind of there. I think they could have done a lot more with her as far as the inevitable bond or romantic bond that she has with Peter in the long run, but we'll get back to that in the Far From Home review. As far as her saying that, oh, by the way, my name is MJ, I can remember my first reaction being, what? I'm not as bothered by that now, but it's still kind of maybe a little tacky. I don't really know. This was also pointed out by Chris Stuckman in his review of it back in the day, or his spoiler review. Felt that it was very similar to the Robin name reveal in Dark Knight Rises with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, John Blake, as it turned out to be Robin Blake. He felt that it was basically the same thing. I would actually disagree, because they take the time to actually give us some character development with him, talking about his past, growing up in an orphanage, trying to hide the anger, and figuring out Bruce's identity after he came back for so many years. With that official name reveal of Robin in the finale, that for me felt earned. This one, not so much. We don't really get any time to give us some sort of understanding of what her mindset is or what her life is like. Then there's some other characters like Laura Harrier as Liz Allen. She doesn't really have much to do either, other than just being the pretty girl that Peter is interested in, and clearly Liz is interested in Peter, and I understand why, because Peter's actually a good person. Not that Liz Allen is necessarily the most well-rounded character in the comics, maybe in some portrayals she is, but from what I've read, she's really just this shallow, prissy, popular girl that Peter has some interest in, but she keeps rebuffing him until she realizes too late that he actually was a good person, but they're clearly not meant to be together. What they do with her here is the complete opposite, and I do like the inevitable connection she has with Adrian Toomes being her father. I find it kind of interesting that Laura Harrier is the same age as I am. She was born in 1990. She was about in her mid-20s when this movie was made and released. You would never think, at least for me, that she's actually in her 20s. At that time, she still looked like a high school kid. And I will say this about the rest of the cast as far as the students and all that. They look and feel like high school kids. I mean, with Tobey Spider-Man in the first one, a lot of them looked at least college age, and I know some people would say that they actually look like in their 40s. I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but that's just me. I love Tobey, but I don't really think he looked like a teenager. Andrew Garfield, I know a lot of people will say that he actually looks like a teenager. I don't think he does. He looks at least 25 in that first movie. And everybody else in his class, including Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy, they don't look any younger than he does. And that's a common thing that you see in Hollywood, where they tend to cast actors that are a lot older than what we're told that the characters are in the movies. That might be something to do with some child labor laws as far as federal or state laws. I'm not really sure. And I know that kids are not exactly easy to deal with on set, and it takes a lot of patience for a certain filmmaker to do that. Case in point, Steven Spielberg. And you know, this shot right here, when we see Peter walking through the hallway, it just popped right out of my mouth. He looks like he's 12 years old. Not that I'm complaining or anything, because he actually does look like a teenager. He has a very youthful face. And that's another thing I think he has in common with Tobey Maguire, and I mean this in a nice way. He looks common, but also attractive also. He looks like a normal person, not someone who looks like a model or a Mr. Johnny Cool guy. As far as the overall visual style, I've heard a lot of people say that it looks a bit bland and very flat. I kind of agree with that, but at the same time, I don't really mind it. But I guess after what we saw with Sam Raimi's style, and even Mark Webb had some of that style in the first TASM movie, it feels like this could have been made by anybody. And I'm not faulting John Watts entirely for that. He clearly puts a lot of energy into certain scenes, but I do wish that we had some sort of visual flair to give him a distinctive style, and I think that's what we're kind of seeing with Destin Daniel Cretton with Brand New Day next month. And this style just carries over into the following two films, although I don't think it's nearly as bad in Far From Home, at least. This one feels the most obvious on my end, and I think that they could have done a little bit better with some of the lighting. I'm fine with the shots at night, but the daytime shots I think for the most part are pretty basic. But as I mentioned earlier with the energy that John Watts puts into it, the best part of the movie for me is the day in the life of Spider-Man sequence, where we see him going on his patrol throughout Queens as we're listening to the Blitzkrieg Bop by the Ramones. I knew the song before, but now, because of Homecoming, I can't listen to this the same way. This is the kind of stuff that I like to see in a Spider-Man movie. Just going about his normal routine, helping the neighborhood woman with certain directions, saying hi to the hot dog vendor down below, who I think actually did show up in the Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings movie some time ago, taking a ride on the number 7 train, and then stopping this kid from breaking into a car.
It's my car, dumbass! Hey!
Then why are you trying to break into it? And it would behoove me to mention Stan Lee's cameo. Just... oh my god. I miss that guy so much. I hope wherever he is on the other side, he's having the time of his life. Hey, is this anybody's bike? Does anyone have a pen? Do you have a pen? This day in the life sequence, along with what we see in the first movie with Tobey, I think are the best examples of day in the life of Spider-Man. I alluded to it with some of the extras standing around on the street. The humor is somewhat of a toss-up for me. I don't mind it in the day of the life sequence, as I've come to call it, but there's certain moments that I think are a little too much and a little too cutesy for my liking, such as when Spider-Man goes off to chase those guys that are associated with the Vulture, and he lands right next to these 2 girls in their tent. I don't blame them, but that's a little too much for me personally. I feel like there's somewhat of an over-reliance on the comedy. The prime example for me is when he uses the enhanced interrogation mode on Aaron Davis, played by Donald Glover, because when Peter gets rid of the training wheels protocol, he's basically flying by the seat of his pants trying to learn all of the techniques in the suit, which leads to some legitimately funny moments, like when he's sitting in that warehouse, or the government warehouse, having a talk with that AI voice, Karen, voiced by Jennifer Connelly, who's married to Paul Bettany, who plays Jarvis and Vision in the MCU. The funniest parts for me with the comedy is this moment right here.
Black Widow coming up.
That is false.
What did I tell you about using the bell for comedic purposes?
And this one right here.
Hey, how long we been here anyways?
37 minutes.
What? 37 minutes? That's insane!
And on that note, I do have to mention the writing of this movie. Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daley, and there's a few other people that were involved in the screenwriting process. They have a credit with the Horrible Bosses movie. It was all right, I guess. When I found out that they were writing this movie, I thought, I don't know about that. But you can make a similar argument that the Russo brothers had something similar where they did You, Me, and Dupree. Based on that poster, I know I shouldn't judge a movie by its cover, but I remember seeing that and thinking, what the hell is that? And watching the writing of this movie, I don't think it's horrible with the comedy, although I think sometimes it gets a little too overboard, like with that enhanced interrogation moment, but they make up for it immediately in that moment.
Can I give you some advice? You gotta get better at this part of the job.
I don't understand. I'm intimidating.
No, you're not. What kind of talk is that? No, you're not going anywhere. Come fix this. Nope, sorry, you're a criminal. You deserve that. And there's a couple of things that I'm probably going to get a little heated on, but there's a few moments that happen in here that I've heard some people, like Andrew from the Escape Pod podcast, which I did a video on a couple months ago, talking about the worst scene in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. He had this to say about Tom Holland in Homecoming.
Like in Homecoming, every single person on that boat would have died, and it would have been Peter's fault if he wasn't helped or saved by Iron Man. Yeah, he saved them in the Washington Monument. Again, that was his fault for blowing it up in the first place.
No. Bullshit. He did not know that it was a bomb that they were carrying. The movie makes it explicitly clear when he asks Karen what that whole glowy thing was. How was he to know that it was a bomb that they were carrying around? He had no clue what was happening. As far as the Staten Island ferry scene, the feds were the ones who interfered with what Spider-Man was doing. He had it all under control, and that's what caused everything to go awry when they immediately popped out from undercover, telling Spider-Man to get on the ground. How was he to know that the feds were there? Whose fault is that? Not Spider-Man. The feds did that. And as far as the bank heist fight, which Andrew doesn't mention in this one, but he, Tom Holland Spider-Man, is joking with the thugs as he's fighting. Joking at the right time and not coming off as too insufferable. And then when that device accidentally goes off, which by the way, he did not do that on purpose, mind you, goes right through that bodega and he drops everything to make sure that the owner's okay. Similar thing goes for that Staten Island ferry scene. Even though odds are if Iron Man hadn't shown up, he probably wouldn't have been able to stop that ship from sinking. When innocent people are put in harm's way or the people that he cares about, that's when it all stops being funny and it's time to get down to business. That is Spider-Man. And you cannot tell me that Tom Holland is more reckless than Andrew is, who didn't even bother to stop the armored car that Rhino was driving, causing it to crash into a taxi that was going to strike Max down and that Spider-Man saved him from anyway. The same taxi that he allowed Alexei, the Rhino, to crash into in the middle of that intersection because he didn't stop the truck and wanted to just clown around for a few minutes just to be some haughty showboat. And I went on another rant again. As you could probably tell about Spider-Man, I'm extremely passionate about him. He's very, very near and dear to my heart ever since I was 12 years old. So forgive me for getting too over the top. But as far as the action, they're perfectly fine and actually kind of fun. But I think what's also missing is some sort of visceral intensity or rawness to it. I didn't feel a similar thing like I felt when Spider-Man in the first movie with Tobey is going up against the Green Goblin, or like when he takes on Doc Ock at the bank heist or on the elevated train. And even Spider-Man 3 with the armored truck scene where Sandman gets onto it. It's really quick, but I feel like there is some sort of energy that was put into that one. I'm biased, I'm admitting it. I'm trying to be as fair and balanced as I can here. Ever since then, I don't really feel like a lot of the action scenes in a Spider-Man movie have been really raw or visceral or had some sort of grit to it, if you know what I mean. The closest we see is in the finale when he takes on the Vulture at Coney Island, or when he goes up against Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin in No Way Home. But I still have yet to see an action sequence in a Spider-Man movie that can give me that same sort of visceral excitement that we saw in the Tobey Maguire trilogy many years ago. Hopefully Brand New Day can rectify some of that. And I know that's not really fair for me to say that, but when you have the bar set really high in the beginning, how do you measure up to that kind of thing? It's almost impossible, really. I think if anything, if you can get close to it or in that ballpark, I will take what I can get. I don't want to sound like I'm settling for less, even though I probably am. That was like lightning in a bottle in many ways. So I understand how anything that comes after that is bound to be littered with issues. Story, aesthetic, you get the picture. But as far as the inclusion of Tony Stark, he's not really in there as much as I thought he was going to be. And I wish they dug a little more deeper into that dynamic between Peter and Tony. I do really like what we see from it in the movies, like with the Avengers or this one or Civil War. But man, seeing the way they bounce off each other, if we had just one movie with them together where they were the main stars, I would pay money to see that 5 times in one day. But I do kind of like how, even though it looks like Tony Stark doesn't really care about what Peter's up to, he is keeping an eye on things. And for all of his narcissism, he actually does care, and he's not an idiot. He's able to figure certain things out. Even when somebody tries to get a one-up on him, which does happen from time to time, even Tony Stark, for the most part, is able to see, no. What are you doing?
Gotta sound like my dad.
No specifics, but
Oh, this one hits close to home.
oh, and I forgot to mention the overall genre that this movie was going for. They were clearly inspired by the John Hughes side of cinema, dealing with teen drama in high school. I don't really think they cut quite as deep as I think they wanted to, even though I do like the similarities they have, like in the sequence where we see Spider-Man going through the backyards. That's clearly a parallel to Ferris Bueller's Day Off, when we see Ferris trying to get home before his sister does to spoil his secret. I don't think it's perfectly done in this one, but if this is all we're really going to get with Spider-Man in high school for a while, I think it's time to show him as a normal adult for a change. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to portray him as a kid, but I think it helps to show him as an adult, struggling with the everyday stuff that you and I do. We saw that with Tobey in his films, and we saw it recently with Nicolas Cage's Ben Reilly in Spider-Man Noir. You can still have him be a relatable protagonist. He doesn't always have to be a teenager or a college kid. And I think this movie does get the basic stuff right as far as the fundamentals of Spider-Man. He's someone whose life is being messed up by his superhero responsibilities as Spider-Man. Every time he's about ready to do something that any normal kid would want to do, something comes up where he has to do a duty calls response. I think some of the consequences of those choices could have been done where it hits a little harder, where they don't allow him back on the decathlon team, for instance. Gradually, as the movie goes on, I think it does kind of feel a little more hard-hitting, because he ends up in detention for abandoning the team at the contest, or when the eventual reveal of the Vulture being Liz's father comes up, instead of just hanging out with Liz at the dance, he decides to do the right thing and stop her father. I could speak for me. I would tell her everything, saying, Liz, your father's the Vulture. I'm sorry to do this to you right now, but I have to stop him. By the way, for any guy that Liz dates in the future, they should ask her this question.
Was your father by any chance a vulture?
But on that note, let's talk about Michael Keaton. Before this, I had been wanting to see Vulture in a Spider-Man movie. There was a lot of talk that he was going to show up as the main villain in a Spider-Man 4 with Tobey, which ended up getting canceled by Sony. But the character ended up in a Spider-Man movie anyway. So here we are with Michael Keaton, who we all know is famous for playing Batman back in the late 80s, early 90s. Both are winged creatures, and they're very hardcore intense. And Michael Keaton, to his credit, he has a really kind of subtle but scary intensity to him that I don't really hear a whole lot of people giving him credit for. Maybe they have and I just don't know about it. But what they do with him in this movie is that he's a construction guy helping with the cleanup of the Battle of New York. We see the flashback in the opening where he's cleaning up all the alien crew that was led by the Chitauri, and then the Department of Damage Control comes in and takes over everything, putting Adrian and his crew out of a job. Naturally, they feel wronged, and they decide to take matters into their own hands by stealing all this equipment to get back at Tony Stark and getting all the money they feel like they deserve. It's a typical poor versus the rich type of scenario, but this in the beginning I think is actually a really effective way of establishing the Vulture's motivations. And eventually when he's revealed to be Liz's father, that I thought was a great reveal. And I still remember back in 2017 being so caught off guard when he opens the door. But eventually Peter tracks him down to his old warehouse. Peter in his homemade suit, which actually I think looks very similar to the Ben Reilly Clone Saga costume. I know I'm not the only one to probably say that, but just couldn't help but notice. But this speech that he gives, talking about how the rich don't care about the little guy, and that Peter's running a fool's errand trying to stop him, even though he respects his dedication. And bear with me here, when he says this...
You and me? They don't care about us.
But of course we get the scene where Spider-Man pushes himself out of that rubble. And that might be the best scene in the movie for me, besides the day in the life sequence, when he remembers what Tony says to him, if you're nothing without the suit, you shouldn't have it. After everything that this kid has been through, being so blinded by his determination to prove himself, he knows what's more important and that he doesn't need all that high-tech equipment to show that he's a hero. And to rewind the clock, I absolutely love how Toomes is able to figure out Peter's secret, where he's taking Peter and Liz to the school dance, and she points out, oh yeah, Spider-Man was here, Spider-Man was there, and you weren't here, you weren't there when all that happened. And when Liz is making all those connections, he starts to figure it out. The performance of Michael Keaton is subtle, but it speaks wonders. But what I like about the hero-villain bond, they don't really have much of a strong disdain towards one another. Vulture has his own goals, and Spider-Man just keeps getting in his way. That's the whole point of the hero-villain dynamic in the Spider-Man comics. There's certain villains that he does have a personal connection to, but for the most part, it's the villains having their own agendas, and they get so frustrated when Spider-Man keeps getting in their way. And we also see the Shocker as part of the Vulture's crew. Not really much to say about the Shocker in this one. I was kind of hoping for a more traditional look of the Shocker, but I guess certain things you can't exactly translate that well in live action. While it would be cool to get some of those things from the comics, but I think in a live action sort of somewhat grounded setting, it might not be the best decision to go with. I don't really get that upset over it. Maybe it's just a me thing. And I've heard some people criticize the look of the Vulture, how they didn't like he had some sort of mechanical, scary helmet look to him. Now again, I wouldn't mind seeing the harness where he can flap his arms to fly through the air. But I do like the approach they took here, where they use the alien technology to create a flying suit, and how he uses a helmet mask flying at high altitude and high speed. That's a realistic thing for me anyway, and I don't think that the Vulture is the most groundbreaking villain in the Marvel comics, so I wasn't expecting a whole lot from the Vulture anyway, but Michael Keaton's portrayal definitely adds to it for me, and the connection he has with Peter, call me crazy, but I kind of love it. So eventually Peter gets a call from Tony Stark. He's invited to the New Avengers headquarters that we see in the later two Avengers films, presented with the Iron Spider suit. But after everything Peter's been through, he decides, you know what, actually, I'm just going to stick to the ground for a while, be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Tony's clearly baffled by that, but he actually grows to respect him and says, you know what, you made a mature decision. I respect that, kid. Also, when we see Pepper Potts show up asking where Peter is, and they decide, oh, actually, how about we announce our engagement? What Happy Hogan says, I've been carrying this since 2008. Clearly, Sony is bragging about the fact that they're in the MCU. And that's also another indicator when we see them in the gym scene, where all the girls are talking about what they would do if they were in the same room with a certain Avenger. If you're bothered by that kind of stuff, I could see how that would annoy you, but I honestly don't really care. And there's a lot of other things I'm not even mentioning. Like, I love the moment where Spider-Man climbs the Washington Monument. That actually feels kind of intense and visceral. Seeing the web wings or him reacting to the instant kill mode. No, I don't want to kill anybody. And Donald Glover's character, Aaron Davis, mentioning his nephew.
I don't want those weapons in this neighborhood. I got a nephew who live here.
I knew it back then, but somewhere out there, Miles Morales is walking around. He's bound to show up sooner or later. And of course, the final image of Peter getting the suit back and Aunt May walking in. I would have changed the dialogue, though, because I think it's a little too much. I would have had her said, Peter, what the hell? Or just not say anything at all. Just leave it open for the audience to say, uh-oh, what's going to happen now? But it is a very triumphant feeling when he gets the suit back. And it's a way for Tony to say, you know what? You do deserve the suit. And by the way, Michael Giacchino's score not really a standout for the most part. When you follow up on Danny Elfman's iconic theme, that's also a really high bar to follow. But in certain moments like that, or when Spider-Man is sitting on top of that roller coaster in the Coney Island sequence after the authorities show up, it feels very in vein of the heroic vibe that Spider-Man exhibits, that you feel like this kid is on his way to becoming the Spider-Man that we all know and love. And of course, we got the following credit scenes where we see Adrian Toomes in Rikers Island prison, having a run-in with Matt Gargan, one of his associates, asking him if he knows Spider-Man's identity. But of course, due to his respect and admiration for Peter, especially for saving his daughter Liz, he says no. And we're about to get a payoff for that with Gargan's return in Brand New Day soon. Took about 9 years, but hey, good things come to those who wait, right? Potentially good things, anyway. And in vein of the MCU trend where the post-credit scene is usually just a fun addition.
How many more of these?
Well, you might have to include 2 more in that one, Mr. Evans. I would say Spider-Man Homecoming is a perfectly harmless, fun adaptation of the Spider-Man character. Even though it has some strong characterizations with Peter Parker and Adrian Toomes, for the most part the character stuff is pretty flat and surface level, and a little bit too overbearing with the comedic timing. But you got Peter Parker trying to prove himself as an Avenger, dealing with all the stuff involving the Vulture, and the dynamic between the two when it eventually shows up in the third act. I would not put this really high on my list as far as a ranking of the Spider-Man films. If I remember correctly when I did my ranking a couple years ago, I would say this is somewhere in the middle. I'll put the link to it right here. But if you're looking for some perfectly harmless fun to chug popcorn in your face on a sunny Saturday afternoon watching a movie, this is definitely the one for you. And I think this is what Spider-Man needed at that time. After everything that happened with the TASM series and how Sony was trying to figure out what to do next with its cash cow, but I would say it definitely paid off in the long run. Not great, but good. That's all I gotta say about Spider-Man Homecoming. If you'd like to see more from me, just hit the like and subscribe button. Stay tuned for more videos coming up soon. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Later!